Warm welcome to Professor Bilagher, and I sincerely hope that you enjoy tonight's lecture.
Great, thank you so much, Helen, for this very warm welcome, and thanks very much also for this turnout. It's really encouraging to see that several of you are interested in this talk. So I will indeed, as my colleague said, talk about peace education in this lecture, but there will be an opportunity for Q&A. So what I hope is that you will not be too bored, that you will stick around until the end and then join us for a bit of a discussion, because of course I'm also interested in learning from your views. First of all though, let's talk about why do we need this thing that we call peace education. And I think we need it especially in this time because of the fact that especially in recent times, we are facing this phenomenon that we call globalization, right? That I guess many of you, maybe even all of you, are familiar with. We, the peoples of this world, have become ever more interconnected and interdependent. And whereas on the one hand, this leads to great opportunities. For example, it leads to the fact that we are all united here in this space in China, even though several of us are from Europe and from other parts around the world. There's also the potential of conflict. I would like to refer to the words of Martin Luther King that several of you might be familiar with here, who in a famous speech in 1968 said that through our scientific and technological genius, we have made of this world a neighborhood, and yet we have not had the ethical commitment to make of it a brotherhood. We must all learn to live together as brothers, and of course sisters, but this was 1968, but yeah, let's say that he meant probably brothers and sisters, or we will all perish together as fools. And one image that I like very much to illustrate this is this. We are all together on one boat, and at this point in time, some people on this earth that we all share are facing problems, and we, the persons who are on the other side of this boat, may think that this does not really concern us, and we're really happy because the problem is not on our side, the problem is on the side of the others. But what I think we have to realize is that we're all in the same boat. So if these persons are going to sink, we are going to sink with them. And I think this somehow outlines the reason why peace education is so incredibly important. This is the time. I don't want to go too much into the contemporary world situation, because otherwise I would cry, but this is a time especially where peace education is particularly relevant. I have taken this picture around 4 years ago in the city of Beirut. What you see on the right side of the image is a Christian area that's called Badaro, and on the left side you see a Shia area that's called Xi'an. In the Beirutis, who were of course traumatized by the civil war that that country has gone through, has kept some of the buildings that were damaged during the civil war intact. So you see here a shell building, a building that has been shot at many times, and the Beirutis have decided to keep it to remind future generation of the destructive force of war, and for this not to happen again. I think it's fair to say that war is a lose-lose situation. If one country attacks another, of course the country that's being attacked loses, but the country that is attacking also loses a lot of life, loses a lot of economic resources, and it will lose a lot of time, and it will lose many other things. In, let's say, like this area of peace and war, there's two types of studies that are somehow well known. The first is war studies. In the introduction, Dr. Helen mentioned King's College London. King's College London is actually quite famous for its war studies department. And there's also peace studies. What is the difference between these two types of studies? War studies will teach you how to prevail in a war. So if you're in a war, how are you going to win it? Peace studies talks to us about how can we prevent war, how can we make sure that we don't get there. On this slide, I would also like to refer to somebody who was, in my mind, one of the greatest thinkers of the last century. She's nowadays more known for her innovations in pedagogy, but really this lady was apart from an important educator, also an important philosopher. Her name is Maria Montessori. She is from Italy, where she worked. And she held lectures in Geneva in what is now the International Bureau of Education. And one of the things that she said is that establishing lasting peace is the work of education. All politics can do is keep us out of war. We, as educationists, will of course let the politicians do their work. We trust them to help us stay out of war. But we as educationists have to build peace. And in this lecture, I would like to talk a little bit with you, not to you, but with you, about what that means. So what is it that we need to do and how can we do it? To my mind, one of the key texts in this regard is the Constitution, and more precisely the preamble to the Constitution of the United Nations Education, Science and Culture Organization, for short UNESCO, who in 1945 wrote the following text. 1945, as the European amongst us will know, that's the end of the Second World War, and UNESCO was founded at the end of the Second World War to maintain world peace. What does this preamble say? Well, in the first place, it says what we need to do when you talk about peace education. So it says that since wars begin in the minds of men and women, but again, this was 1945, it is in the minds of men and women that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So what this says is that war doesn't start in a parliament, it doesn't start, let's say, like in a factory, it starts here, it starts in our minds. But the interesting thing is that it also says, okay, so it's with the minds of men and women that we need to work to establish peace. But it also tells us something about how we should do that, because then it continues to say that it's ignorance of each other's ways and lives that has often been a common cause throughout the history of mankind of that suspicion and that mistrust between the peoples of the world through which their differences have broken into war. So what happens? We don't know each other. We have got different cultures. We've got different ways of doing things. We look different. We eat different things. We dress in different ways. And these differences can lead to a certain distrust between each other, right? We can think like, well, this person is different from me. Can I trust her? Can I trust him? And because we are ignorant of each other's ways, we don't trust each other, we believe that we should settle some conflicts through violence. So what the Constitution really seems to say is that in order for us to do what is requested from us through peace education, we should reduce ignorance of each other's ways. We should, in other words, get to know each other better, which sounds, of course, very simple. But what I want to say here is that a university like XJTLU is doing exactly that, because we have got here united a number of students from, I would guess, China, who are willingly coming to a university where the main language is English. We have got persons from other parts of the world who also would like to work at a Chinese university. So I think everybody who is sitting in this room already has got this commitment to decreasing rather our ignorance. We all want to get to know each other, and so therefore already the fact that you're here at XJTLU and that we are here as well is already something that is very important in the spirit of peace education. So the Constitution of UNESCO says that we should work with the minds of women and men. What we should do is decrease ignorance of each other's ways, and the tool that we can use for that is also mentioned in the same Constitution. I marked this word in blue, it's education. So education of humanity for justice and liberty and peace are indispensable to the dignity of men and women and constitute a sacred duty which all the nations must fulfill. And as you can see, I've chosen a picture here that I took at the China Art Museum in Shanghai. I like this quite a lot. I believe this was for the most recent Shanghai World Expo. To my mind, it looks quite retro, but as a matter of fact, it's not that old. I believe it's from 2010 or 2015, thereabouts. And you can see people from different origins celebrating together and communicating with one another. When we talk about recent developments, in 1974, I know 1974 is not recent, but in 1974 there was a recommendation on how we should infuse education with principles that are relevant to peace. That was a UNESCO recommendation. And in June of this year, the president of this university, Professor Xi'an and I, went to Bangkok to attend this meeting here with representatives from all across Asia. This was the regional launch of the update of that recommendation, whereby the world community, in its 194th session of the General Conference of UNESCO, had decided to update this recommendation to the needs of this time. And those 194 countries that approved in the General Conference this update included, of course, the People's Republic of China. And of course, this was a very important milestone. And what is it that this recommendation says that must be done in the spirit of peace education? Well, it says in order to enable every person to contribute actively, we have to promote international solidarity and cooperation. Nice words, but how do we do it? And the following objectives should be regarded as major guiding principles of educational policy. So the first is an international dimension and a global perspective in education at all levels and in all its forms. In XJTLU, I think we're somehow doing quite a good job in this. In many of the studies that you're undertaking, this international global perspective is being integrated. Understanding and respect for all peoples, their cultures, civilizations, values and ways of life. Awareness of the increasing global interdependence between peoples and nations. Abilities to communicate with others, which includes learning each other's language. And here, of course, there's also an important depth of many of myself and my compatriots learning each other's languages, of course, also means that a larger number of people might consider studying Chinese, which of course is also very, it is actually a UN language. Awareness not only of the rights, but also of the duties incumbent upon individuals, social groups, and nations towards each other. Another important tool in this regard has been Sustainable Development Goal 4. I will imagine that the majority of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. They were approved in September 2015 in New York by hundreds of heads of state. Goal number 4 is the goal on education. And goal number 4 has got a specific target, that's number 7, which is education for sustainable development and global citizenship. So what I'm doing, I'm working on global citizenship education, is not an invention of myself or of this university. It is actually enshrined within the very United Nations SDGs. So this idea of global citizenship education is something that the countries of the United Nations have agreed on. And what this says is that by 2030, we have to ensure that all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and culture's contribution to sustainable development. What I would like to address specifically today is this question here. Can we use educational assessment as an engine to drive social improvement and in particular the agenda of peace? Why? I will guess that several of the persons who are here are from China. And what we know, of course, about the Chinese education system is that it is somehow quite what you call Gaokao driven. You know, I mean, before coming here, many of those among you who are from China had to pass through the Gaokao. And I'm sure that you felt quite a lot of pressure to be successful in this Gaokao. Maybe your parents said to you, do your best, study hard. And you yourself wanted to study hard and do your best. So what you may have realized is that success in the Gaokao is the key to success in life. If you do a good Gaokao, if you're successful in the Gaokao, your chances in life will be very good. You might go to a good university, you might get a good job, you might earn a lot of money, you might buy a nice house, establish a nice family, etc. So an assessment or examination like the Gaokao, it can be a very powerful engine to push persons to do things. I mean, you're being pushed by the Gaokao. And the thought here, the essential thought here is, can we somehow use educational assessment not just to make sure that, for example, the Chinese pupils are very good in mathematics, or in languages, or in history, or in science, but in the Gaokao can we have also got something like peace education, so that the Chinese students will also focus on peace and try to be successful there. Not just the Chinese students. Of course, this is a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, so therefore we were thinking at the time, or one could be thinking, about having this kind of mechanism for students all across the world. Well, and I don't want to bore you too much. If you're interested in it, you can look up more information about it. But at the time, what was developed was indicator number 4, which belongs to target 7, which belongs to goal 4. So 4.7 is this, and each of these goals has got specific indicators that are monitored by the United Nations. And indicator 4 of SDG 4 target 7 was trying to use assessment as a tool to to make sure that countries were integrating peace education in their national curriculum. Why do we need educational assessment? First, we've asked the question, why do we need peace education? I hope there's like some kind of consensus around it. But educational assessment, I hope that everybody knows kind of what it is. It is like educational testing or educational measurement. You're giving some kind of assessment. You have to solve issues. You might have heard of PISA, for example. Why do we need this? Well, we need to assess educationally, for example, for the purpose of certification. Let's say that you want to get the driving license. If you can't drive, you go on the road, that's not good, right? So somebody needs to assure that you are capable of driving before you go onto the road. So you have to do a driving license, and through this driving license, your capabilities, your abilities to drive are being assessed. Are you capable of driving? Here's your driving license. You are now allowed to drive. So here we use assessment for certification. It can be for a bar exam to become a lawyer. Again, like you can have certain knowledge, but are you capable of being a lawyer? This is being assessed through the bar exam. Are you capable? Then your capability will be certified. Sometimes we assess purely for learning. Imagine that I'm a teacher. I want to know whether you understand what I'm saying. So therefore, I say something and then I ask, like, was it clear? So I assess your understanding. Assess your understanding through asking questions. So here's just a teaching and learning, or rather teaching strategy. Sometimes we assess in a way that's called diagnostic assessment. So here we give a test and we look at what kind of mistakes you make. And then based on your mistakes, we understand what kind of things we as teachers should do better. This is diagnostic assessment. We've got action research. Controversially, we've also had teacher management. Sometimes, for example, teachers who've got students that have got higher results on educational tests get more money. Because maybe the educational manager thinks like, look, if your students get high marks, it means that you're a good teacher, so therefore I will increase your salary. Of course, this is controversial because of the fact that if your students get high marks, it's not just about your achievement as a teacher. It can also be that those students live in a disadvantaged area, right? And it can mean that teachers will not want to go to those disadvantaged area anymore, because there it's very difficult to ensure that students get, let's say, like high scores, and therefore they will get paid less. Finally, and to my mind, this is, let's say, like the most important element, or the most important function of assessment. It is for monitoring and evaluation of policy. I know that some of you are students of education, and those of you that are students of education, I'm certain that you are familiar with educational tests like OECD PISA, TIMSS, PEARLS, those international assessments, where, by the way, very often the Chinese education system is obtaining very high scores, which I think reflects the hard work put in by Chinese students in order to obtain these scores. But it is through these kind of international assessments, what we're doing is we're monitoring and evaluating policy. In particular, we are trying to verify the right to education. What do I mean with this? I mean that when we talk about SDG 4 on quality education, which is the goal that you can see over here, in the past, the United Nations said what is the most important is the children go to schools. So between 2000 to 2015, the United Nations ran a program that were called the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs. And among these MDGs was one goal that said that we want to have universal primary education for all. So children need to go into schools. And I think we can say that this program has been very successful, especially in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, but also in the Arab states and Southern Asian countries, including, for example, India. Tens of millions of children that had not been to school before now went into the classroom. And this was, of course, a fantastic achievement. But when specialists conducted measurements towards the year 2012, 2013, 2014, they noticed that even though physically those children were present in the schools, they were often not able, let's say like in 4th, 5th, or 6th grades, to read one single sentence, right? So now you're physically present in school. Yes, we are managing to have those children in school, but they're not learning. So therefore, there has been this realization that if we want to realize the right to education, we don't just have to think about the presence of students in classrooms, but are they learning something? That, to an extent, has been called the quality of education. So this is why we run these international assessments, like OECD PISA, TIMSS and PEARLS, PASEC, CPLM, ERCE, SACMEC, etc. We run this international test of learning to see whether, in general, in countries, students are learning things. I think that these kind of tests are very useful. This is an example from Latin America, where I've had the pleasure to work between 2010 and 2016. And what you can see here is data from 2 studies. CERCE, which took place in 2006. Is that correct? Yeah, I think 2006. And TERCE, which took place in 2015. And the data which you can see reflected in these graphs, what they show is the difference in achievement between female students and male students. So, if you see the bar towards the right side, then female students are having a better achievement than male students. If you see the bar towards the left side, it's the other way around. If the color is gray, there is a difference, but it's not statistically significant. If you see that the color here is either, I think it's green, yeah, let's say that it's greenish, and here maybe pink, it means that the difference is statistically significant. So, what this graph tells us is, of course, several things, but one of the main things it tells us is that in a majority of countries, in 2015, in reading, because this is measuring reading scores, female students are reading significantly better than male students, right? I mean, we can see this in this graph. In 2 countries, male students are doing better. Those countries are Ecuador and Guatemala. But in all of the other countries, female students are doing better in reading than male students. By the way, this is 3rd grade primary, to be clear. And also in the majority of cases, this is statistically significant. Now, I don't want to bore you too much with this information, but what I just want to say is that the difference was larger in 2015 than it was in 2006. Why is this important? It is important because in terms of monitoring the right to education, what we're seeing is that the right to education of boys, sometimes it's not being achieved. Because why are the girls doing better than the boys? It's a question that we need to ask ourselves. It's not a question that I can answer at this point in time. What I find very interesting is that when we look at historical trends, it was the other way around. So when similar measurements were being done, for example, in the 1990s, boys were doing better. I think there exists sufficient empirical evidence that says that there's no innate ability of women. That means that women should do better in reading. So therefore, somehow, the education system, and with the education system, I'm not saying teachers. You know, the education system is all of us. It's also, let's say, like the parents, it's friends. Education system is quite holistic. The education system is, let's say, like failing these boys. So this is important for us because it says that for some of these boys, the right to education is not being achieved. Maybe this doesn't interest some of you as much as others. I understand that there will be parts of this lecture that might be a little bit more, less exciting, but I do want to say something about what assessment in education means. What is the place of assessment in education, right? So education, if you define education as an activity, we usually say that education is teaching, learning, right? These two things, is somebody teaching, someone else learning. That is basically what education is about. And of those two activities, which is the most important? Learning, of course, yes. Because if somebody's teaching and no learning takes place, then the teaching is useless. If somebody's not teaching but learning takes place, that's good. Because what really matters is that someone learns something. So this activity, this series of activities, teaching, learning, is usually underpinned by something that we call a curriculum. Of course, to the education students among you, that's of course no news. And this curriculum usually addresses three things. The first of these things is what to learn. So this is what we call learning objectives. The second thing is how to learn. That's what we call pedagogy. And the third thing that this curriculum addresses is assessment. And what assessment is about is to ensure that the learning objectives have been achieved. And the taxonomy that has been the most influential in classifying those learning outcomes was Benjamin Bloom's. Some of you might have heard of Benjamin Bloom. He was associated with the University of Chicago, and I said Bloom, but actually it's Bloom et al. Because he worked with a team of 34 persons from all across the United States, because at that period in time, the United States was, I have to admit it, let's say like the leading scientific power in the field of, let's say like education. And what Bloom's team said is that there essentially exist three domains within which we can learn things. That was at the time, like of course now to an extent thinking has evolved, but Bloom and his team, because Benjamin Bloom, he said in the first place you can learn something that we call cognitive, here with your head, let's say like head knowledge, right? Cognitive knowledge. And he had, let's say like this, let's say like taxonomy. At the lowest level you can remember or recall. At a little bit higher level, you can understand, which means that you can then explain the information. You can apply it. I don't agree with this. To my mind, application should be at the top. But here, of course, I'm citing Bloom. Then you can analyze it, evaluate it, and at his top, or their top, it's creating. So if you're creative, this is what we call, let's say, higher order thinking skills. So the higher skills on the pyramid are those that require, let's say, like better performance. Right, so the highest skill that you can achieve in the cognitive realm, according to Bloom, is to be creative. However, the team also said you can't just learn something here, you can also learn something here. Just for those who can't see it, I'm pointing at my heart. So this was called the affective domain. which I think is related to what we nowadays call social-emotional learning, which I think is very important. And here, what the team basically said is, you know what? You can't just learn knowledge, but you can also learn emotional things. And finally, the team also identified the psychomotor realm that you can see reflected here. You can see the different categories. Oh no, it's empty. Okay. So it's empty, and there's a reason for that. That is that the Bloom team identified the psychomotor realm. Psychomotor realm refers to things related to the body. The example that I like to use is that of playing basketball. I think you're familiar with that sport. I believe it's specifically popular in the United States. In basketball, you know, like the player has to take a ball and, you know, make sure that that ball jumps up and down. The player will also then walk around, right? So very good coordination between the movement of the hand and the movement of the feet, but also coordinating with the eye, because there's this basket, you know, this round thing that the person is looking at. Then this person is making a mental calculation and making sure that she or he uses exactly the necessary strength and the right direction to throw the ball in a precise angle to land in the basket. So perfect combination between the work of the eyes, the feet, the hands, and the brain. This is what psychomotor is about. And sometimes this is looked at in a disparaging way. I think it's completely incorrect. The mastery of the body, for example, in sports, but also when you dance, which can also be like really rather, let's say, like complicated, requires very specific skills that we can group under what we call psychomotor. Unfortunately, the world thought that this is the most important. You only have to be smart here. You don't have to be so smart here. And you certainly don't have to be smart here. And so the volume on psychomotor was never written. So therefore, if there's any ambitious student in this hall who says, you know what, we are going to change that. We believe that the psychomotor is also important. Here's maybe a piece of homework for you. This can be your claim to fame. Sometimes there's some misunderstandings about assessment. People sometimes say, oh, assessment is the same as evaluation. That is not correct. Assessment is only one element of evaluation. Sometimes people say, well, in assessments there's winners and losers. Also not correct, in my view. Usually, statistically speaking, you know, like distributions follow the bell curve, but actually that's not necessary. It is what we often see, but it's not necessary. And in addition to that, even if you're on the wrong side of the bell curve, it's good to know that you're there, because it can give you or your teachers or others who should support you an extra push for you to be doing better. Sometimes people think that assessments are the same as examinations. That is not correct. Assessments do not necessarily lead to a certification. For example, as a teaching learning strategy, that doesn't necessarily happen. And what to my mind is the most important is a very dramatic confusion, which is that performance is the same as intelligence. If somebody is doing very well on a test, that's really great, but it doesn't mean the person is smarter. It can mean that the person has worked harder. It can mean that the person has had a better day. It can mean that the person has had a better teacher. It can mean so many different things. But performance is not the same as intelligence. And the colleague here said, okay, what is written there? Psst, it's like, psst. You know, I just hush, want to say a few words about intelligence because it is such a controversial concept. Of course, we know that intelligence is difficult to operationalize. Measurements such as IQ tests can be stigmatizing. And really, I think it's very difficult to speak about intelligence. But, you know, there was this Greek philosopher whose name was Plato. And he said something that I thought was very inspiring in his famous book, The Republic. He says that intelligence or wisdom is the ability to see unity in diversity. So many things might look very different, but we can see a unity in these things. What does this mean? So for example, you see an apple tree, a cherry tree, an oak tree. You see all kinds of, let's say, like different trees. And even though all of these trees look different, we understand that these different trees belong to the same category of trees. I see a gray chair, I see a throne, I see, let's say, like a chair in an airplane. These are all different things. But because I'm intelligent, well, I mean, have some level of intelligence, I see that all of them belong to one class, to one category of things. And chairs belong to the category of furniture. Furniture belong to the category of etc. Well, these exercises of having the ability to see unity in diversity is what, according to Plato, is intelligence. And I like that one because I think this is also something that we see among humanity, right? We eat different things, we dress differently, we maybe look differently, but I think it is intelligent for human beings to also see the unity in the diversity among us, because there's of course also many things that unite us. Another theory on intelligence that I particularly like is Howard Gardner's. We all know Howard Gardner, you know, associated with the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He said that there are at least 7 intelligences. Now, something strange happened. So I read this book, and I read about 7 intelligences. But when I was looking online, I always saw like 8. And this intelligence of naturalistic was added. I don't know what happened. I should, let's say, like double check on that. But apparently, Howard Gardner himself added this 8 intelligence, but I'm not very familiar with it. But the other intelligences I think are very interesting. So logical mathematical, somebody can be good in mathematics and can have that knack, you know, can have that intelligence. But if you've got like an intelligence, a knack for mathematics, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're very good with people. You know, you're not necessarily like people smart. Gardner said that's because there's like a different intelligence at play. You've also got something that's called interpersonal intelligence. You know, I think we all know that person, you know, maybe we haven't been that person, but we know the person in secondary school who's like very capable with people, right? She or he doesn't get good grades, but goes to the teacher, high five, low five, and, you know, is like able to persuade the teacher to forgive them. So this person has got good interpersonal intelligence. So what this theory is trying to say is that you can be intelligent in different ways. There is not one intelligence. It's not the case that, oh, either you're good in mathematics or otherwise you're not intelligent. No. You can also be good in music. You can be good linguistically, verbally. You can be good with your body, what we call like psychomotor, right? Visual, spatial, which has got to do, for example, with painting, etc. These are different types of intelligence. Yeah, and here some empirical data seem to say, and I'm now backtracking a little bit from what I said before, forgive me for that, but empirical data seem to say, we have to be very careful, that women and men, number one, at birth we have got the same brains, by the way, just I want to clarify that. However, around age 6 or 7, we can already note a distinctly female or male brain. If to a neuroscientist you show a scan of your brain or of your children's brain at 6 or 7 years, you can see whether it's a boy or a girl. So what happens in those intervening 6 or 7 years? Essentially 2 things. The first is the influence of hormones, which shape that brain, but also, let's say, like expectations, because we treat, let's say, like women differently than men. Their brain shapes differently. You know what we call in education, the plasticity of the brain is enormous, the way that we can shape the brain. It's absolutely amazing. However, what we see is that it seems that in general, women seem to have greater linguistic verbal intelligence, and men seem to have better visual, spatial intelligence. Yeah, I don't know whether this offends anybody, but personally I think that strong AI actually is not possible. I don't think that the machine can be intelligent, but I'm going to just say that and run very quickly and go to the next slide, because that might, of course, be a little bit controversial. So we've talked about assessment. Let's go back to peace education, and I want to introduce you to some ideas of this. Gordon Allport, scientist from the United States, actually not an educationist, I think he was a sociologist, said in the 1950s that prejudice is largely based on lack of familiarity. This was called the contact theory. You remember that we looked at the UNESCO Constitution and we said that one of the main causes of war is like ignorance of each other's ways. Well, the empirical data gathered by this gentleman, Gordon Allport, seems to validate this idea. He was talking about the United States, so at the time, as you can imagine, the United States was segregated. People with a different skin color, tended to live in different neighborhoods. And because there was not sufficient contact between people of, let's say, like a darker skin and lighter skin, there were a lot of prejudices, unfounded prejudices among these different groups. And he organized tours of, let's say, like black people to non-black areas and vice versa. And what was noticed is that these kind of tours could lead to even more prejudice. However, if you would give the other group education, or would give the group's education about the other group, then it would lead to a much better perception. So a contact with other groups can help to reduce prejudice if it is properly managed. For example, if you go to a holiday in France, right? We'll go to speak about it in a moment. And maybe there are certain things that you don't know about French culture. You can have some kind of, let's say, like negative experiences. And then you think like, oh, the French are this or the French are that. But it's not the case that the French have got, let's say, like a different culture from the Chinese person in general. And if this contact can be managed, people can be educated about it, then actually it can be a very positive experience. John Galtung from Norway, founder of Peace Studies, said that if there's no violence in a certain context, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's peace. Because if there is no violence, he said, well, that's negative peace. It doesn't mean that there's actually justice in that situation. So it can be that one group is oppressing another group, and the other group is not reacting in a violent way. In this case, we talk about negative peace. Only if there's also justice, he would say that's positive peace. We have got one very fortunate thing. Here in Suzhou, we live close to the magical city of Nanjing, which is only just a short train ride away from here. Got one of the best universities in China, not as good as XJTLU, but okay, we're at the same level, but it's a very good university, and it is University of Nanjing. There's the UNESCO Chair of Peace Studies. I believe it's one of the very few UNESCO chairs on peace studies in the entire world. Professor Cheng Liu, he's there. He has been here at XJTLU once. I'm trying to get him here one more time. In 2015, this very renowned scholar in peace education wrote with a German professor called Egon Spiegel a book in which he addressed the role of religion in war and peace. And finally, of course, there's the mythical Darla Deerdorf from Duke University. She's a chair of intercultural communication at University of Stellenbosch, originally from Duke University, and she talked about the importance of intercultural communication to peace. Of course, some of you might have recognized this joke. It refers to critical thinking, right? So the teacher is saying to the pupil, question everything, and then the pupil is saying, that why should I do that? Now, I don't want to talk too much about this. I also realize some people might be yawning at this stage. Across culture is all I want to say. There exist different perspectives on several, let's say, like issues. And one of those issues can be nature, right? So there's this thing that's sometimes referred to as, let's say, like a northern view. Cultures in the north, like the Chinese culture, like the European culture, we believe that nature is there for us to exploit it. We can take nature, we can mine it, we can cut those trees, we can use nature for our own benefit, which is sometimes in the literature juxtaposed or contrasted with something that's, roughly referred to as the indigenous view, because in this perspective, indigenous people say that nature is not something that we can exploit, it's something that we should care about, because the earth takes care of us, and simultaneously we also have to take care of it. I don't know whether it's really true. You know, this is a generalization, but let's be honest, every theory in the social sciences is a generalization, which means there will be exceptions. And even if it's true, I don't want to say that this is better or that that is better. A culture is simply a different way of doing things, of thinking about things, and to say this is, let's say, like better or worse, is sometimes very problematic. One thing that I personally wonder about, and a question that I really want to leave you with, is this question of, under this diversity that we have in ideas, you know, like in our cultures, there's things that we can look at in a different way. Is there an underlying universal ethic, right? I mean, you remember that Plato said, intelligence is the ability to see unity in diversity. In all of this diversity between each other's cultures, is there something that unites us? Is there an underlying ethic that unites all of us together? I also want to, on this slide, leave you with a little bit of a provocative thought, which is what we call evil the origin of thinking? So we see those other persons are doing things differently from us. You know, like those persons from the north, they exploit human for, you know, they exploit nature for human purposes. You know, that's bad, that's evil. And sometimes, or often, we think that bad things are bad. And that's quite logical, right? Bad things are bad. However, we would never ask questions. We would never say, why is it like this? You know, if everything were good. So sometimes it's good that things are bad, because this fact, the existence of evil, makes us think. Now we start to think like, why is it like this? Right? So all I want to say with this is that the things that you think are bad sometimes can be good, because we can use them to train our brains, train our minds, and reflect on things, and make our own thinking and brains a little bit bigger. Darla Deerdorf, so she's this important specialist in intercultural communication. And some of you might be familiar with, especially students who work with me, might be familiar with Geert Hofstede, Dutch sociologist, who basically like took this concept of culture and subdivided it in certain dimensions. So he said one element by which you can distinguish culture is this concept of power distance. I don't know whether some of you are already familiar with it, but power distance reflects the extent to which less powerful groups in society expect, I don't remember the definition, but let me just simplify it like this. If there's, let's say, like a boss and a subordinate, if there's a big power distance, the boss is much above the subordinate. Subordinate is very small, the boss is very big. There's a big power distance. If there's, let's say, like a low power distance, then the boss and the subordinate can almost be like friends. They're, let's say, like closer together, right? So I looked for some data, and all of these data have been collected on quite sizable samples. So it's quite a robust data set on which this is built. And what's being also said is that Hofstede built his theory on cluster analysis, which means that all of these dimensions actually come from the data. He's not like imposing these dimensions. In China, for example, from those 4 countries that I've got here, Brazil, China, Indonesia, and United Kingdom, China is the country with the largest power distance. And the United Kingdom is the country with the smallest power distance, which means that on average, if you're in a Chinese context and you've got a boss, then this boss is, let's say, more directive, is more of a boss, whereas in Britain, the boss is closer to you. Importantly, I'm not saying this model is better or the other model is better. It's just different, right? So I'm not saying better or worse, but these are different ways of dealing with things. In Indonesia, the power distance is also quite high, and in Brazil as well. Individualism. You know, in some countries, individuals take decisions by themselves. They don't care about their parents, they don't care about others, friends, etc. Individualism, I decide for myself. In other countries, the opinions of others are very important. For example, the voice of the parents in deciding what are you going to study, you know. What we see according to this data, again, maybe you can already guess it. United Kingdom is quite an individualistic country. Indonesia is an extremely collective country. So in Indonesia, people will really consult with their family and their friends before taking any major decisions. China, which I would have expected to be very collectivist, actually is somewhere in the middle, according to this data set. You can go to the culture factor yourself, do all of the analysis you want, don't want to talk too much about it. What I just want to say is that this culture, concept of culture exists scientifically. There's things that we can know about it. Maybe just one or two things that I just want to mention. Long-term orientation. Are you the kind of person who, if you get, let's say like 1,000 kwai, are you going to save your money? Or are you going to spend it? Because, you know, we live today, you know, we need to enjoy a little bit, right? If you want to spend your money immediately, it means you've got short-term orientation. I live today, I want to enjoy today. If you've got long-term orientation, you don't think just about today, tomorrow, next week, you think about next year, what's happening in 10 years. So you know what, I've got 10,000 kwai, I'm going to save this money. This is long-term orientation. The country of those four, which according to this data has got the highest amount of long-term orientation is China. China, right? So in China, we can say that China is, according to this data, a nation of savers. Whereas in Brazil and Indonesia, there's more of a, let's say, short-term orientation. Don't want to go into it too much, but you can look at it for yourself. I think it's very useful and interesting. If ever you go to travel somewhere or you go to study somewhere else, take a look at this tool, because this can already give you some information about how people think there. You know, I mean, if I'm, let's say, like with a Chinese boss, I simply behave differently because I know that this person's got a certain expectation of me. I also want to emphasize that, and this is relevant to peace education, and this is why in peace education we need to think about intercultural communication. Such kind of cultural differences can also lead to misunderstandings, and even, if you're not careful, to war. The example that I often give is that of Japan and Europe. So in Japan, what's very polite, especially if you're talking about, let's say, like communication with a senior, is to look down. It's considered polite in that culture. In Europe, on the other hand, to be polite, you have to look someone else in the eye. So the Japanese person and the European person meet one another. European person looks the Japanese person in the eye. Japanese person is looking down. And now the European person is thinking like, why is this person looking down? Is she trying to hide something from me? A little bit, might be a little bit a sneaky person, right? But no, not sneaky, very polite, you know, according to their culture. It's just that this culture is different from your own culture. The Japanese person might also think, why is the European person so aggressive, staring me intently in the eyes? You know, does the person want some kind of like problems? You know, why this aggression? But again, European person is not being aggressive, but being polite, just from the European perspective. So if you're not aware of this, it can lead to misunderstanding, it can lead to negative experiences, and it can also lead to conflict. In France in particular, country where I've had the pleasure to live for 5 years, I have to say an absolutely fantastic country. But one thing that you have to be aware of is if you go into a shop, you have to say bonjour. You have to make a greeting. If you just go into a baker and said like, you go in and said like, I want one bread, the person will become furious because this is so rude. You cannot do that. You have to say bonjour, I would like to have one bread please, blah, blah, blah. Yes, sure, here it is, and you have a good time. But if you're not aware of this, you can get, let's say, like a negative experience. So all of this just to say that intercultural communication is important in the context of peace education. Body language is another one. You might know that in the Arab world, some people are Muslims, and in some elements of, let's say, like Muslim religion, it is not desirable that persons of different genders give each other a hand. So if a woman wants to give a hand to a man, the man might politely decline, or vice versa. The lady might politely decline. But in Latin America, I've lived there for 5.5 years. It's a culture where people hug each other a lot. Sometimes you have to get used to it. Colleagues can hug you. They might even, let's say, like kiss you on the cheeks. It's a completely different culture. It's not wrong. Again, it's not better or worse. It's just different, and we have to be, of course, aware of it. I like this cartoon a lot. So this is now with reference to the role of religion in peace education, because, of course, there can be no peace until they renounce their rabbit god and accept our duck god. So is this a rabbit or is it a duck? What do you think? Is it a rabbit or a duck? It can be both, right? I mean, it can be a rabbit, it can be a duck. It just looks, it depends on your perspective. So these two groups don't realize that the rabbit god and the duck god, it's exactly the same. There's no difference between them. So they are arguing over something completely futile. What I want to be clear on is that in some religions, and I had the pleasure of briefly discussing this with a colleague just a few days ago, the position on war can be ambiguous. I've been reading one of the main texts of Hinduism that some of you might be familiar with, the Bhagavad Gita. And if you haven't read it and you're interested in this specific phenomenon, then I can definitely recommend it to you. So at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, there's this person who's called Arjuna, and Arjuna has to go into a battle, into a war, to fight against, let's say, like an other clan. But in this other clan, among those enemies, are several persons who are related to him. So he says to Krishna, Krishna is, let's say, like a deity. In Hinduism, he says to Krishna, Krishna, you know, I don't want to fight. And some people say that, well, you know, religion is about peace, so therefore certainly Krishna will say to him, like, oh, if you don't want to fight, you don't need to fight. But that's not what Krishna says. Krishna says, like, look, Arjuna, I'm sorry. You don't want to fight? I don't care. You have to fight. Just kill everybody, and I will take care that those who are killed, the good ones will go to paradise and the bad ones will go to hell, kind of thing. Something like that, something like that. So all of this just to say that sometimes people think that religions focus on peace, but unfortunately, empirically, this situation is a little bit more complex than that. The sociologist Émile Durkheim from France in 1912 even went as far as saying that the establishment of society coincided with the establishment of religion. And what in religion you call sacred is you and your own group, and those who are profane, that means unsacred or maybe even sinful, are the other. So religion is the definition of society. So my question is, can we and how can we strengthen the role of religion as a partner in peace? You know, peace is, let's say, like a very nice ideal. I like it. But sometimes to achieve something valuable and something important, we have to do some digging in the dirt, right? And certainly, let's say, like the feeling of humiliation is dirty. I mean, not dirty, but it's not pleasant, you know. But there exists even something like humiliation studies, persons who are heroically digging in the dirt in order to hopefully find something valuable there. In peace studies, in peace education, I think that I'm not alone in thinking that humiliation is particularly important to understand war and also to understand peace. So one person, Lindner, has called humiliation the nuclear bomb of emotions. And authors such as Elshout have linked this to extreme violence, such as school shootings, but also to terrorism. Humiliation can sometimes be used as a weapon. So if there's, let's say, like already a war situation, then, you know, let's say like the persons who are dominant are trying to humiliate the other persons with a specific objective to break them, you know, to have some kind of, let's say, like victory. But it can also be a trigger for war. You know, like imagine a hypothetical situation where a big country, a big empire is defeated by a smaller country. Now this bigger country feels humiliated because how is it possible that this smaller country defeats us? At this point in time, there's a feeling of humiliation. if there's a feeling of humiliation, we have to be very careful because, as Linder said, humiliation is a nuclear bomb of emotions. So this then makes the question arise, what can education do about it? My answer is let's learn from psychoanalysis and let's make the unconscious conscious. I don't know whether there's any psychologists among you. If there are, then you might have heard the name of Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, and maybe even we can call this person, let's say, like the founder of psychology as such. And I will also, let's say, like accelerate because I realize that we might also be slowly running out of time. But what I do think we can safely say is that psychology, and I hope that educationists in this room will agree with me, at this point in time at least, psychology is the main discipline within education, especially developmental psychology. So how does the brain, how does the psyche develop? This is something that we in education look at a lot. Now, according to Sigmund Freud, actually, when we look at the human mind, you remember that when we looked at the UNESCO Constitution, we said that wars begin in the minds of women and men. So now, if we want to understand war and we want to understand peace, what we need to understand is this mind, right? What is this mind? How is it structured? What stories does it tell us? And according to Freud, and actually I'm a bit of a fan of Freud, I definitely don't agree with everything that he said, but I think he was really, to be honest, I think he was a genius. He said the majority of the human mind is actually unconscious. So as we exist in time, we see things, you're here, maybe you're like a little bit bored, you think like, okay, when is it going to end, etc. Part of you is, let's say, like conscious, but while you're being in this moment that we share, you're also, a lot of other things are going on in your mind that you're not aware of. You know, your mind has got a lot of activity that is hidden from view, and that's what we call unconscious. He said that biologically speaking, this relates to a part of the brain that actually has an animal origin. So he said that in every human mind, there's still a little bit of the animal. And that's, by the way, not bad. You know, like there's many good things about animals. And I mean, for example, an animal has got like an instinct or a drive that it wants to eat. And that's good, because if we as human beings don't eat, we're going to starve. You know, I don't want to demonize or satanize the animal. The fact that we as human beings have got maybe a part that's animal is actually not that bad. But in addition to that, our minds are also colored by social expectation, you know, things that we call norms and ideals, which we try to conform to. So that's, he said, our mind also consists of something that we call the superego, right? It's like the voice of your mother or the voice of your father. Like the animal inside of you goes into the restaurant and wants to eat like this, but your parent says, no, 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 take your chopsticks, you know, sit straight, put on some kind of like, and then you eat, not like an animal, but like a human being. So this is your super ego. And these two parts of the mind, so your superego, the voice of your parents, the voice of society, that what you must do. Let's say this is like your restrictions, the law, etc., the norms, and between this and the animal inside, there's something that's called the ego, right? And what Freud said is that what the ego does is trying to mediate the relation between the superego and the it. If and when the ego does not manage to balance that relation well, you become mentally ill. So then you fall into maybe depression, or you fall into what he called neurosis, which is also not bad. I mean, it's also not good, but you know, you can get physically ill. You can also have, let's say, like mental challenges. The important thing is then to pick up on it and do something about it. That is, of course, important. But what this points to is really at the importance of emotions. And what I'm very glad about is that recently, also in education, the importance of emotions has been, let's say, like realized to a large extent. You remember that we talked about Bloom, right? The cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor. And of course, the social-emotional refers to the affective, the emotional. And there is this new branch of education, and I'm very sorry, but I'm going to put someone on the spot because my team just recruited someone who's working in this area of social-emotional learning. It's the person over there with the green shirt. Bhavana, if you mind to stand up just for 1 second. So this is Dr. Bhavana Shrestha. She hails from Nepal, and she is going to help us, thank you, here in XJTLU, help us develop programs in this area, because we believe that social-emotional learning is very important for the well-being of Chinese students and international students. So therefore, she will be doing work in this area. So emotions, I would like to compare them with a giant. Giant is, let's say, like a big thing or a big person. A giant, and this giant can become your enemy, right? And if this is your enemy, your feelings or your emotions, then you've got a formidable enemy. It's very tough to win a battle against a giant, but can also be your friend. And if you've got a giant as a friend, that's not bad. So what I do want to say is that the supposed superiority of rationality over emotions has led to challenges over the past few decades. Contemporary development suggests the importance of emotions on an equal footing with rationality, highlighting the potential of socio-emotional learning, or SEL. And there are several frameworks that somehow classify this, but the most widely accepted is probably the Castle framework that you can see over here. And this here says, for example, that there needs to be, let's say, like emotional awareness. So, for example, you feel angry or you feel sad. In the first place, what's important is that you're aware of this emotion, and that then might help you to manage that emotion through emotional management. It talks about social awareness and relationship skills. I like social awareness a lot because that talks about, I guess you know that expression, reading the air. I might have talked about it before. Sorry if I repeat myself, but some people walk into a room and they can like immediately, let's say, like feel what the situation is, right? Maybe you can call it emotional intelligence or emotional performance. But this ability, if you obtain it, will help you a lot in your later career. We're going to the last slides, but just to say that UNESCO has developed a framework for global citizenship education that I have talked about, and this says that, well, yeah, of course, the cognitive is still important. We still need knowledge in this globalizing society, but of course, there's also huge importance of the socio-emotional, but also behavioral, because we can know that something is the right thing to do. We can feel that something is the right thing to do, but we still don't do it. So this framework tries to capture also the importance of action, of doing certain things. And what I included here is a quote from Pablo Casals that I really like. Love for a country is a magnificent thing, but why should love stop at the border? I think it shouldn't. So examples of global citizenship education can be, let's say, like communication, things like learning languages. This is GCED. Traveling is also a form of GCED. Simply if you go somewhere on a trip, maybe you go to Korea or Japan or the United States or Brazil, that is also global citizenship education because you will learn something. Structured online meetings with students elsewhere, creating a garden which creates a connection with the earth. And then, of course, also global citizenship requires knowledge, facts about other times and places. You know, this little girl, for example, she's reading a book of Nelson Mandela. You might have heard of Nelson Mandela, a very important, let's say, freedom fighter in South Africa. Technology can play an important role in peace building as well. I just want to say here, I will just go through this slide and not talk too much about it, but it also leaves space for Q&A. But one thing I do want to say, and that is that, especially in education, technology is never just technology. So social media have become a force for, but also against peace, and so have new platforms. I would like to talk more about it, but let me not do that. So I'm coming to the end of my talk. After this, there's also the references. I understand that these slides will be shared with yourself. So if you would like to know more about any of the things that I've mentioned, you can find them here in those slides. One thing that I would also like to show you is this cartoon that I kind of like, right? Which really is maybe one of the foundations of, war, where one talks about our blessed homeland with our great religion, our noble people, and our heroic adventures. Whereas when we talk about the others, we talk about brutish invaders, backward savages, and primitive superstition. The last thing, and after that, so I'll close it, is show you a small video, and that is related to a hypothesis that I personally have, which is that I'm from Europe myself. I think that one of the reasons why for a long time in Europe, I mean, unfortunately now the situation is different, but for a long time we haven't had war in Europe. I think that this is because of football, which North Americans erroneously call soccer, because, in football, what is happening, it's almost, let's say, like a tribal ritual, where the fans of one side go to the stadium, the fans of the other side also go to a stadium. There's, let's say, like no physical war. Sometimes some hooligans are beating themselves up, but usually people do not die, like it can happen, let's say, like in a real war. Usually they drink a lot, and even after fighting, they somehow feel happy. I don't know whether anybody plays football here. If anyone does, then maybe you've heard of the third half. Do you know what the third half is? No? Really, no one? Okay. I hope that maybe some of you will try football after this small video, but the third half, in football you've got the first half and the second half, and the third half is when the members of both teams go to have a drink together. Yeah, so there's, let's say, like a football game, first half 45 minutes, second half 45 minutes, and afterward everybody, like sisters and brothers, goes to have a drink. So anyway, what I want to say about football is that it's almost this tribal ritual where the fans of one club go to the stadium, they shout, they can be very aggressive, but they discharge all of their energies, and if there was like humiliation, maybe now we're going to defeat them. And through this discharge of emotions, there is like a reduced desire for war. So what I want to say, my hypothesis is that if there's problems between countries, let's try to solve them on the pitch. I realize that this is like a little bit of a naive thought, but the last thing that I want to leave you with is this video about, the Argentinian football team. It was playing in Russia. This is 2018. I believe it was 2018, the World Cup. And so they were playing against Nigeria. It was a very tough situation. The last few minutes of the game, and Argentina was going to be kicked out because Nigerians, they were, let's say, like, I think maybe on the winning side. But in the last few minutes, Argentina made a goal. And in Argentina, football, it's like a religion. And I just want to show this discharge of emotion to you to make it more credible that sports and football could be, let's say, like also a form of peace education. You will see strange things. For example, in a pharmacy, you will see, let's say, the security guard embracing a client and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's see.
9:44 minutos de la noche. Argentina está empatando a 1 con Nigeria. Ahora mismo está fuera Argentina. Y a menos de 5 minutos para el 90 ocurre el milagro. No saben qué decir. Argentina lo había conseguido. Rojo se muerde el albiceleste y en un suspiro pasa de la adrenalina a la emoción. En el momento del golpeo, el fondo atiende expectante, algunos boquiabiertos, y vemos a uno rezando. El remate es en presencia de 3 representantes de la iglesia albiceleste: Maradona, el Papa Francisco y Leo Messi. El resto es historia. fenómeno mundial. Esto es la fiebre albiceleste. De la FanZone de San Petersburgo a la FanFest de Moscú. Y de Moscú a Barcelona. La cuna del mesianismo. Sin duda uno de los lugares donde se vivió con más fervor. Sin camisetas y con gente por el suelo. De Barcelona al epicentro, Buenos Aires. La diferencia horaria no impidió que miles de personas se dieran cita para la primera final mundialista.
Me pareció una película de suspenso terrible.
Con colegios en modo recreo. Con farmacias en stand-by. Atentos al abrazo entre cliente y guardia de seguridad. Esto es el hall de un cine en el centro de Buenos Aires. Esto una tienda de ropa. Así en el IBC de Moscú. Y así en la Antártida. Porque la fiebre albiceleste no entiende de fronteras. Solo de pasión. Solo de...
So just to say that, especially like the last sentence where the commentator says, you know, the white blue fever doesn't understand the concept of borders. It only understands passion and it only understands feelings. So anyway, that's it from my side. Back over to the chair. Thank you.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes remaining. So if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask, please raise your hand and I can bring the microphone to you. Okay.
Okay, Professor, I'm a year 2 student. My name is Wen Tao, and we've contacted via email regarding the issues of LIF001. Yeah. Okay, so I came to this lecture for 2 reasons, because my LIF001 topic is related to the theme of the global education and citizenship. And also, currently I'm participating in a research project regarding the cooperation with students from South Africa. Yeah, it's an intercultural research project I'm participating in. My question lies in the UNESCO framework about because recently I've seen a Education for All Global Monitoring report by UNESCO, which have just said that there are over 34 million children and teenagers who lost their rights for education because of wars and conflicts. So my question is, you mentioned that knowledge, action, and emotion are the 3 important elements of that UNESCO framework. So what is the kind of methodology needed to put those 3 elements into practice to reduce the wars and conflicts worldwide in order to promote the global education? Yes, this is my question.
Thank you so much. Wen Tao, listen, firstly, pleasure to meet you in person. I remember your message. I mean, maybe this doesn't sound very good, but there is no agreed methodology. So basically, peace education, it is still, let's say, like a field that is in its initial stages. You have seen the reference to the recommendation on peace education. So it says to an extent what should be done. To an extent, it also says how it should be done. So, for example, things like traveling, things like learning languages might help you. And whereas there is, let's say, like a theory hypothesis that, for example, if I learn Chinese and I go to China, I feel closer to China. Whether this will then also lead me to take positive actions or behaviors that display, let's say, like a positive disposition towards China, this evidence is still a little bit weak. So definitely there's still work to be done there. There was something else I wanted to mention. Yes, indeed, of course, many children are out of education because of war, which is absolutely dramatic. I can't say too much about the specific cases. Myself, I've had the pleasure of working in Syria, and also Gaza Strip. Would, let's say, like peace education have solved those situations? I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely painful to see what's happening now. I'm sorry if that's like a little bit of a shallow or narrow answer, but I would also be happy to follow up via email if that would be of help. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I just want to ask your opinion about an argument like that. Do you think that the more we get educated, the more we become evil? Because it's like the education standard global is increasing every day. But you see recently we see the like nationalism in politics, monopoly in technology, or protectionism in economy. So do you think that peace education can deal with everything like that? Yeah, thank you.
I'm so sorry, could you rephrase it one more time? So you were saying whether, let's say, like peace education can deal with wars as they occur nowadays?
It's like peace education and can deal with everything like nationalism, monopolies, or protectionism in every war. Is a word.
I would say yes, but when I showed, let's say, like this video of those football fans, of course, I want to show something a little bit unconventional, because we don't usually think about football as peace education. One thing that I think is, let's say, like a very important force in the world nowadays is social media. Analysts have shown that in social media there's this phenomenon that we call echo chambers that you might have heard of. So basically, if you would surf to certain social media sites, and for example on your telephone, and somebody else goes to that same media site, you will see a certain scenario, and the reactions to that might be different because the algorithms that send you, let's say, like certain comments are different from that of other persons. I think that one thing that I've briefly shown is a tab that relates to something that's called media and information literacy, which is, let's say, like one branch of peace education, which is what you can see here. It relates to digital literacy, but also news literacy, like how do you interpret the news? How do you know, of course, what's being told you, but maybe also what's not being told, etc. And I think that this is, let's say, like a concept in peace education that would be very helpful if it were applied. Because, of course, I don't want to say too generic things, but let's say it can be that you go to a certain country and this country will speak, for example, very negatively about Brazil. Said, oh, the Brazilians are this, the Brazilians are that. And whereas the Brazilians are, let's say, like normal people, but through, let's say, like the media that we receive, certain images are given to us that would create a certain disposition of the people to say, think negative things about the Brazilians. Sorry, I'm going to be a little bit more concrete. There was someone called Xi'an who developed a documentary that's called Real Bad Arabs. And here the word real is not written R-E-A-L, but R-E-E-L, so Real Bad Arabs. And this documentary analyzes, let's say, like movies from Hollywood, and shows how in Hollywood movies, consistently persons from Arab countries were portrayed in a negative light, right? So Arab people are very aggressive. They're like terrorists, they're very dangerous. And of course, like with common sense, you can say, okay, and I mean, I lived in the Arab world also for 5-6 years. I can assure you that the Arab persons are very normal persons, like persons in my own country, like persons in your own country. So I like this analysis a lot. Movies can be a very powerful tool to make people feel something. You see a movie, you identify with the hero, you think, that this hero is very good. There's like enemies that need to be defeated. Well, if all of these enemies have got like a certain skin color, I think you have to be like a little bit suspicious, And definitely, I think in this documentary, Xi'an, I think you can maybe find it on Chinese social media or via internet. Take a look at this documentary, Real Bad Arabs, and you can see how movies can work to create certain perceptions of certain people. And so therefore I think that in peace education, if we can work with, for example, a concept like this, media and information literacy, which trains people to look at these kind of things critically and to evaluate the information critically, then yes, I think that we can make a contribution towards peace, because then the citizens of a country will simply not accept that, let's say, persons with an Arab background will be, let's say, like crudely attacked. And of course, this is not just Arab people. I mean, there's also this some level of stereotypization of, let's say, like people with black skin color. And of course, what we know is that these kind of things are falsification. So I hope to go some way towards answering your question. Thanks.
We have one question from online. It's a little bit more specific, but can education help women in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I mean, that's of course. Of course, our answer is yes. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I have to be, of course, very careful what I say. I don't want to criticize persons needlessly, but what I do want to say is that, for me personally, gender equality is let's say, like, not negotiable. But what's worse, and I think there exist, I know there exist abundant empirical data on this, that countries where women's rights are most violated are those countries that on other indicators fare the worst. I think we have to be a little bit careful with drawing causal conclusions, but I don't think it's entirely unfair to say that if in a country, let's say, like, women are significantly disadvantaged, you are, let's say, like, cutting into your own muscle. So if as a country you want to progress as a country, you want to be developed, you want to make sure that your country will do well, then definitely I think women's rights to education has to be, of course, respected, not just in Afghanistan. I hope I've found a balance between careful but also clear.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we have enough time for one final question. If anybody in the audience, okay. Maybe let's do two, and maybe Professor Bilagher, we can do them quickly. Okay. Yeah.
I will make it simple. Okay, we know each other actually. I was wondering about. I saw a framework of positive peace and negative peace. So can you please give me a very simple example of how educational can give the transfer? How can educational approaches and to utilize to transition from the negative peace to positive peace? Just simple example, that's enough. Yeah.
Yeah, very simple, very simple. Actually, because we know each other. It's not such a simple question, to be entirely honest. It's actually an extremely complicated question. So one thing that has happened, for example, in South Africa, is that there has been a truth commission. There has been, of course, apartheid. We are familiar with that. And after apartheid, let's say, like, power was transferred from one majority group to the whole population. And then what happened was that there was a process by which, let's say, like, people testified about situations that they experienced during apartheid. And this was called, let's say, like, the Truth Commission. Those kind of experiences were broadcasted, let's say, like, nationwide. And by hearing all of these stories, people felt that they could somehow come to peace with this situation. What not many people know is that the Truth Commission had actually been copied from Chile, a country in South America, that transferred from, let's say, like, autocratic rule under a president called Pinochet to, let's say, like, a democratically elected government. So already after the power in apartheid had been transferred, there was, let's say, like, negative peace because there was no violence, but people feeling uneasy, and they felt that injustices have not been addressed. So I think that the Truth Commission, and I think that if you would Google for this, the Truth Commission in South Africa has been an example of where, let's say, a country transferred from negative peace to positive peace. have all problems been resolved with that? No. We know that, of course, the country also has to an extent been on a bumpy road, but I definitely think that the positives outweigh the negatives. So yeah, all that. Also, yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to ask your question? So this will be the final. Final.
I'll get faster. Dr. Moritz, I actually very appreciate your efforts of putting forward this kind of dialogue, and I think I'm also doing the very similar thing about how to leverage the power of education to prevent the war. But I'm studying the international relations. Our approach could be a little bit nuanced and a little bit different. I recently started an initiative called the 5th China-American Student Conference. In the next year, about the middle of July, our university will invite about 20 American students who wish to work for the Department of State or for the American government in the future to China, to Suzhou, to our campus, to engage with our students within the XJTLU campus. I firmly believe this kind of interactions, as you just mentioned, this kind of traveling, the interactions with different cultural backgrounds of the people could really foster the mutual understandings of two countries. So I firmly believe by pushing forward this kind of communication efforts, we could lower the risk of launching a conflict between China and the United States in 2027. Yeah, hopefully. I just wonder how you like this idea, or to what extent do you think this kind of communication initiative could work? Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, I just want to say that I applaud it. I think it's really fantastic. I think that in peace education, we need to be, let's say, like generous as educationists. Really, we are not territorial at all. If you, as a person from international relations, want to do something from this, it's really fantastic. I mean, I want to be entirely clear about that. And I just wish that these kind of initiatives, as you are taking, this kind of initiatives will take place more broadly. So I want to thank you. Also because, at the end of the road, we all have the choice just to spend all of our days playing video games. And you decide not to do that, but to take a positive initiative. So it's really fantastic. Number two, I also think that the choice that you made is also very good. I mean, just from social psychology, we know, for example, that if you talk about the traffic situation, imagine that there are, let's say, like many cars somewhere, and those cars are very aggressive. As soon as if you've made eye contact with the driver, the likelihood that this person will actually drive over you is significantly reduced. Only the fact that the persons from the United States and China that you bring together have looked each other in the eye, I think will significantly decrease, I hope, possibilities of conflict in the future, because, by doing something similar as meeting someone, you recognize, let's say, like the humanity in the others. One very last thing that I want to say here is that I was going to present also findings from a study conducted here at XJTLU. I didn't, because actually this is still under consideration by a journal. And I worked on this with several students, by the way, from this university. And what was really interesting is that, so what we did was interview students about what they think peace education was. And what their opinion was that peace education or global citizenship education is somehow about this realization that we all belong, let's say, to a greater unity, that there's some kind of, let's say, and maybe this sounds a little bit wishy-washy, a little bit, let's say, vague, but there's some kind of like oneness between all kinds of people, even though, as I said, we might look different, do different things. And of course, by contact with each other, people somehow realize it to a greater extent. That's it from my side. Compliments.
All right,
Thanks.
Thank you. You give me more confidence of operating this kind of event.
Okay, on that positive note, I think we'll bring tonight's lecture to an end. Can we all say a thank you again by Wave of applause to Dr. Bilagher for his talk. And hopefully see all of you for number 6.